Hi everyone and welcome to the first episode of King Arthur and the Lady of the Lake. My name's Michael Laurier and this is my co-host Helen Glover. Helen, welcome.
Hi Michael, so exciting.
Absolutely, this is going to be epic. So we have decided to do this simply because of the fact that this really speaks into a lot of the work that I do. So I wrote a book last year called Forging Excalibur, Rediscover Your Masculinity, and it's a personal development book for men. However, when I go into the Arthurian legend and we look at how that was actually structured and it came about, there's a really beautiful part of it where King Arthur actually gets Excalibur or takes Excalibur and is given to him by the Lady of the Lake. And then he goes off and he defends England against attack. And then he brings Excalibur back and gives it back to the Lady of the Lake. And I've always thought that part of the legend was really beautiful because there's a wonderful fusion of the masculine and the feminine in that part of the legend that really speaks into what Helen and I have decided to create here. And that is this podcast where we're going to be talking about and having conversations around masculine and the feminine and the relationship dynamics between the two, because I think they're really important discussions to have because there's a lot of people out there who struggle in relationships. And one of the main reasons for that is because we have over decades, perhaps hundreds of years, especially over the last 30 to 50 years, is there's been a mismatch and a disconnect in polarity in relationships between the masculine and the feminine roles in relationships, and also the ability for us as human beings to connect deeply with the masculine and the feminine energies within us. And so, Helen, I would love for you to just talk into how you started working with the masculine and the feminine and what this all means to you and why you've chosen to become part of this and all the rest of it. That would be a really good conversation to have. So over to you for a few minutes and then we'll have a chat.
Okay, well, thanks.
I love the fact that we're doing this together, by the way.
So exciting. It's so incredible the way that things work out. You know, I ended up on a bit of a journey, and I don't even know why. I just decided that I wanted to start a podcast called the Modern Masculine Podcast. And obviously things had happened that made me start questioning the narrative in our society and the suicide rate and all of the different things that are happening right now around us. And there seems to be this widening gender gap and this bickering. And I just felt that was anybody really getting what they wanted? And was anybody really being heard? And you tend to kind of always hear the negative about the opposite sex. And I really wanted to talk to men about what they really felt about what was being said in our environment and what they thought about the negative kind of connotations and the narrative around what's been going on in the last few years. And so I started the podcast and I found it so rich and humbling, inspiring, beautiful. And then I ended up meeting all these amazing men doing incredible work in this space. And then, of course, I've met you as well, Michael, and we chatted quite regularly. And it took me on this really beautiful journey that then kind of got this momentum of its own. And through that, it has become so close to my heart. And I have just this incredible passion for it. And not just the conversations with men, but actually the narrative between men and women and the masculine feminine, and then obviously the masculine and feminine in us, in our ancestral lines, in our history, where we're going, what it really looks like as far as kind of marriages and separations and the impacts on children and what that's doing masculine feminine moving forward for our next generations, etc. So I had plans to do a round table discussion, funnily enough, King Arthur, but mine were going to be called Round Table. And I had a list of all of these subjects that I really wanted to talk about that I feel aren't being spoken about, the more controversial topics. And so there's things about chivalry and there's things about our ancestral past and what it really feels like for men to be spoken about in a certain way, how women feel about that. And then, of course, we started chatting and it seemed this perfect match to have those discussions between us, coming from the deep work that we've done in these areas, you know. So
Yeah,
so I
absolutely.
feel really, really happy to be here, and
Yeah, me too.
activities are awesome, you know. So
Yeah,
yeah.
they really are. They really are. And I think one of the things that I'm excited about as well is that you've got this richness about you as a woman who has stepped into helping men, and you understand yourself as a woman as well. And there's a rich tapestry between that and the work that I've done in terms of psychology, and also I'm a student of Carl Jung, right, which is all around, and he teaches everything around the shadow, which is the unconscious parts of ourselves that we try to avoid, deny, and suppress, which then we see manifested externally in our thinking, how we feel, and our behavior, and then the results that we get. And so, one of the subjects, or a couple of the subjects that we're going to be touching on, is the dark side of the brotherhood, the dark side of the sisterhood. And to put that into
Mm,
context, this is all the stuff that we really experience out there in society and in relationships around, and we'll talk about the light side of both of these as well, but the subjects, as you said, that people don't want to talk about as the darker stuff, which is where we really struggle internally as people, as individuals, as human beings. And then also bringing that struggle into a romantic relationship, or the relationship we have with our children, or with our workmates, or brothers and sisters and parents, and just in every aspect of our lives. And so when we start to look at the dark side of the brotherhood, which is the dark side of the masculine, and the dark side of the sisterhood, which is the dark side of the feminine, we start to get a much more well-rounded picture of who we are as humans, and how we express that internal environment externally, and how we can really begin to step into more embodied and empowered ways of being.
yeah, and I couldn't agree more, because I mean, it's known, I've done shadow work for many years now, and what I see as shadow work, and of course we have this alignment as well with Carl Jung
Yep.
that we only discovered the other day, that we
Yeah,
both
that's right.
Carl
Yeah.
Jung. And so the one of the things that I found a struggle for me is how people are so uncomfortable around
Mm.
things that aren't shiny and happy. And so the
Yep.
uncomfortableness of our society, I feel, is creating this epidemic of shame. And within that shame, then there's this incredible kind of disease of insecurity. And so from that kind of insecurity, and then the inability to sit with the uncomfortable, we cause these great rifts. And the need of not daring to show yourself, or not being heard because it's difficult.
Mm.
And those are things that are really, really important as an environment, kind of out there in our environment. We can only really heal and become joined intimately and correctly and deeply by really sitting in the uncomfortable, and by being okay with it, and
Mm.
really listening, not being defensive that what they're saying is about you. Everything gets kind of turned around and personalized. And
Mm.
it's not that. It's about really hearing where somebody's at. And the more we shine a light on something, it's kind of like bringing air into it, and everything is healed with air, you know. So
Yep.
I think it's going to be a really great space to have those conversations, and see them as granting permission that it's okay to have these parts of us. It's okay that we can all show up being imperfect. We can all show up
Yep.
admitting, you know, I'm kind of a bit like that too, you know. And the more we do that, the more we then the more people come forward and go, oh my God, actually, yeah. And
Yep.
then the healing starts. And that's really
Absolutely.
powerful, you know.
And it's
Mm.
also about having the awareness around that within ourselves, but also creating safe containers where we can feel that that people can express to us, and we feel that we can express to others in a really healthy way, where we feel like we're being held as well, because these are really difficult things for people to talk about. And this is why we wanted to do this, because no one's talking about this stuff, because it's too controversial, because it challenges people and it triggers people, and people really feel stuff around these subjects, around, you know, masculinity, and this thing around toxic masculinity, right? And feminism, and ancestral patterns, and the shadow. Like, people don't want to talk about this stuff, but you and I are quite comfortable in doing so, and we hope to create an environment with this YouTube channel, where we can bring these things to the light of day and people can feel comfortable even just listening to us speak into these topics, and then start to explore within themselves to begin with what that means for them and how they might be able to show up differently in their relationship, in their life with their children, and start to be a good role model for their children, start to become more embodied within themselves so that they can become a better partner, right? And in this as well, we become more integrated as human beings. And so then we feel more comfortable stepping into, the top levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is around a sense of belongingness and self-actualization, which is stepping into our purpose and what that means for us and having a sense of meaning in life so that we can go out and contribute to humanity at a high level, because all of us have so much beautiful potential within us that is largely unrealized, and the world is missing out on that. So I think by really beginning to integrate ourselves at a deeper level as human beings, we can bring that forward and we can all benefit from each other.
Absolutely. And learn some skills around how to listen to each other, and interact. And, it would be really lovely to have people interact on the commentary as well, to say, well, yeah, I have had this happen to me, or yeah, I agree with that, or I don't know about that, and let's start this discussion. I went to London last year, and I interviewed on the streets of London outside the Freemasons Hall. And the question that I asked all these different guys, I mean, there was a guy who worked at a florist. He called himself the only straight florist in London. And there was, yeah, right. And these guys coming out of the Freemasons Hall, there was a barman, there was just a normal guy walking through. And I asked them all the same question. I said, what do you need in your relationship in order to really speak your truth? And it was so beautiful, because there was no point where they were uncomfortable. They were just really open. And it was really interesting that they'd never been asked that before, for one. And two, that they actually expressed what it is that they needed. And the overwhelming answer, although said in lots of different and for somebody to not have an opinion about that. And I think that's what we all want, to be heard without somebody then overlaying what safety felt like to them. A safe container was to be heard, be accepted in what it was that they'd said, without ramification. And then when I investigated that a little more, it was rare that there wasn't a ramification from their truth. And that was just really, wow, So that's what I'd like to have here as well, that kind of safe space where we can discuss things that are difficult, and that then, we don't have to have the other person think what we feel. We don't have to put our opinions onto somebody else. We can own whatever it is we think, and we can learn together. But it is about really respecting each other's opinions.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've really come to the awareness about in my years of also relationship therapy with couples is that really what men want in relationships is they want to feel like they're of purpose and they're of service. And what women want to feel is a sense of connection and empathy, right? And so, and they're probably the main things on an emotional level that people want. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that we can provide that to each other. But I think we get caught up in ego, we get caught up in our shadow, we get caught up in all of these things that you and I are going to be talking about on these episodes. And we can't provide that to our partner because we can't provide it to ourselves. And so I'm really looking forward to this, Helen. And what I would encourage people to do as well is after listening to this, or whilst you're listening, Helen, you've already made a suggestion to comment on how people feel about what it is that we're talking about. In this initial episode, I'd encourage people to comment in the comments on this YouTube video and maybe suggest topics that you would like us to talk about. We've got, as you said, Helen, we've got quite a few topics that you've come up with and you brought to the table here, to the round table, that we're going to talk about in coming episodes, but we're always open to other things that people might suggest, because I think there's a lot more out there than what you and I can bring. And with people's suggestions and interactions and everything, I think there's a richness that comes with that as well. And we can start to talk into things that people want to hear about, in addition to the things that we want to talk about.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
And I think it's nice to say, really, is there anything out of bounds? Not really. And that's the whole point. It's like,
That's right.
let's go there. Let's have these conversations. And I'm okay with being on.
Yeah, as am I. Like
So
I
I
reckon bring it on, because I would love to have conversations that make me feel uncomfortable, because I don't often get to do that.
think, open to being the uncomfortable. The power in that is just beautiful. So I
Yep,
think we're going to really, I think you and I will enjoy this trip so much, and I'm hoping that joy then spreads out to our audience.
exactly. Well, we'll wrap it up there for our first episode, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week on King Arthur and the Lady of the Lake.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.